Hello, everybody. My name is Jared Altic, and I'm a chaplain with the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department. Today, I'm going to talk about chaplain work, specifically being an embedded chaplain with patrol officers. There's so much value, I believe, in chaplains. I think that a chaplain can be the strong right arm of every wellness coordinator. I think a chaplain can be a trusted resource for officers, from the newest officers up to the sheriff and police chief. I think that a chaplain can be a best friend to PIOs and to the community policing and that kind of a thing. However, many agencies do not have chaplains, and many of the agencies that do have chaplains, the program is grossly underutilized, and it's just been collecting dust on a shelf or something. And if you aren't sure if your chaplains are being well utilized, like I think we have them, but I don't know, just go ask any random officer, do you know who our chaplain is? If they look back at you and say, oh, I didn't know we had chaplains, the program is underutilized. Okay. There is so much to be gained from well-trained chaplains used well inside of a law enforcement agency. Now, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, this guy's voice sounds familiar. I am not the voice of, in the stadium that tells you to please stand for the singing of the national anthem. However, at the airport, that voice that tells you to not leave your bags unattended, yeah, that's not me either. I am the host and producer of the Hey Chaplain podcast. Been doing that for several years. Maybe at the end of this presentation, I'll give just a little bit of information, maybe answer some questions about how podcasts can be used for wellness. There's a lot of good podcasts, different types of podcasts that are free resources for your officers and your first responders to be listening to. And a lot of them are really good, and a lot of them are really useful. And a lot of your officers are already listening to podcasts on other subjects. They put that earbud in at 4 o'clock in the morning, and they're listening, but you could steer them toward podcasts that are helpful and point them in good directions. Some of the same types of resources that you got these last 2 days through BluePaz. So the that'll be at the end, but here at the beginning, I'm going to tell a few war stories. And so if you are at your limit, if you're like, I can't take one more emotional story. I've had too much. One more would be my breaking point. And then you have my permission to duck out for 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, that's all right. Now, if you stay, I hope that you understand, and I hope that you trust me that I'm not going to get into gory details, and I'm not going to be overly explicit. But I do want to share with you a week, really just a few days out of my life as an embedded law enforcement chaplain here in Kansas City. I want to share a few days with you that were rough, kind of hard on me, but I think it illustrates the different aspects of chaplaincy that I'm involved in. So, like I said, this was about a year ago, and it was still hot out, and I was on call. And here in Kansas City, Kansas, our police department gives the chaplain on call a take-home car. We have a marked police car. Now, don't be jealous. We've often joked that some of those cars we think were two police cars that have been crashed and cut in half and then welded together. I suspect that may have been the case. We have a pretty decent one right now, but we do drive a marked car. It doesn't have red and blue lights, just has amber lights and no siren. And so we can't go too crazy. We can't get it totally out of control. But I have that car with me when I'm on call, and I'll be on call for a span of 4, 5, 6 days, sometimes a week or more. And I was dispatched out to a call. And so I jumped in the car and was traveling across town, and the car has a radio in it. And so I'm listening to the radio, and a shooting had taken place. It seemed to be kind of a rolling gun battle between two groups, which meant that there were multiple scenes where people were injured, people were being arrested, officers were collecting evidence. And I'm listening to my officers in the patrol divisions respond to this. And one of the first voices I recognized was one of my old grumpy, grizzled veterans. Very difficult, always bad attitude. I love him. And I recognized his voice, and it struck me that he was at one of the scenes and he was collecting evidence and preparing to collect evidence. And his radio traffic was so precise and so concise and professional and respectful. And I'm thinking, wow, here's a guy that a lot of times I wish wouldn't infect the other younger officers with his bad attitude. But when he's working, he was the model of efficiency and professionalism. And I'm driving down the road, smiling to myself about what a great job he's doing and just how much I admire him and respect him. But then I heard another voice, and it was the captain that was running the scene. And it surprised me because I know that that captain is not from that division. And so I had to think through. Now I went to roll calls that morning. Which of these captains are not available if this captain had to go all the way across town to manage this scene? And I'm thinking through that and thinking, are my other captains, are they on vacation or are they sick or something? I'm thinking, do I need to do a follow-up? Do I need to go and find out why were they not working on a day like today? I could run it through in my head. I know which captain should be working in the different patrol divisions. And so I'm kind of thinking if there's follow-up for me to do, but I wasn't going to that scene. I was going to a different scene. I'd been dispatched to a scene unrelated to the shooting. It was going to be a death investigation. And at this death investigation, I went, on scene. I get out of my car and I approach the sergeant and ask for the information. And he's a 30-year-old. The family found him dead, and he's in his bedroom. And then we got the family gathered outside here. And I need, the sergeant had different people he needed me to make contact with and provide some short-term support for them. And in Kansas City, fentanyl hit us pretty hard. It did a lot of places. And during COVID, I was one of the few chaplains that could respond out to death investigations. And so I had a spell there where I was on call for months at a time and going out to these dead body calls where we would see these young, healthy people who looked like they were sleeping, but they were dead, and that was difficult. And so I've seen a lot of these. So I hear 30-year-old dead in bed. I'm thinking, oh no, this is another drug overdose. And I'm pretty concerned. And I start figuring, okay, who's our primary contacts? And I'm responding to which family members I need to talk to. Turns out there's kids in this family who'll be coming home from school in just a little while. And so we're trying to manage all of this. I go to the family and make contact with them, provide some support. They're not a religious family. That's okay. I don't need to pray with everybody. I can just play liaison and kind of explain what's going to happen with the death investigation. I can kind of be the resident expert on what's going to happen with the county coroner and with the funeral homes and the investigation itself and why it takes so long. And I can kind of help defuse and de-escalate and that kind of a thing. But then after I talk with the family, I go to my officers and I've got a sergeant there and then two young officers, and the two officers are having a conversation about why they both want to quit. And they're like, "Hey, chap, how you doing?" I'm like, "I'm doing better than you guys sound." And they're talking about how every agency pays better and lets you chase cars, which isn't always true unless they're trying to recruit you. But you have this discussion happening. And I engage with them for just a little while and try to be an encouragement. And then I go back to the family, then I come back to them. I'm kind of going back and forth, but my clock is ticking. I can't stay. Typically, what I would do is if a dead body is on scene, I'd stay with them through the investigation process, and then when the transportation company comes to pick them up and take them, I typically go with, and I will walk that person out of their home for the last time to the back of the van to be transported to the coroner. I wasn't able to do it that day because I had to get right over to the police station for a debrief. Had a debrief scheduled ahead of time before I'd been dispatched out, and so I actually left that scene before the body did, which, like I said, is not my normal course of action. But I went to the debrief because it was important. This had happened 2 days previous, this event that caused the debrief, and I had my officers there. And this wasn't our normal debrief. This is just me and a few officers and another person. and were walking through this incident that they had 2 days previous. They had taken someone, they had arrested someone, they had complained, the arrestee had complained that they needed to go to the hospital. So they took them to the hospital. We have major hospitals here in Kansas City in the metropolitan area. They are, level one trauma centers and that kind of thing. And so they're in a very busy emergency department. And my officers are standing there with their arrestee, and one of them gets tapped on the shoulder, and he turns around, and a homeless woman says, "Here, take this. I found it in the bathroom," and hands him a dead baby. And there's no words to describe the shock that those two young police officers had to be handed a dead infant. A woman had given birth in the bathroom and run away. And this homeless woman was the next one in the bathroom there at the emergency department and found this child. And the child was deceased. And she saw police officers right out in the waiting room. So she took the baby to them. My young officers are at the age where they're having, they're starting families, they're having children. And that's so unexpected. They prepare themselves when they get called out to a shots fired call or something like that. I mean, some of our SWAT team guys, I mean, they see incredible stuff, but they initiate it. They go to it. This came to them. And so I'm not a clinician, but I do pastoral counseling. And we talked and we discussed all the things we needed to discuss to be healthy, the kind of things we've heard in this conference. And and that was really difficult. And I felt that I couldn't have been there 2 days previous. You may be asking, well, boy, if you're a chaplain and you're embedded with them, why didn't you respond out to that hospital the day before, 2 days prior? Well, because I was on a different call. In fact, I was on two death investigations back to back that evening, 2 days previous. Now we're going back 2 days. I had been on a death investigation as a natural. We wrapped that up. The sergeant had left early. And then that sergeant called dispatch and had me follow him over to the second death investigation. It was a suicide by hanging. Now, it was summertime, it was hot, late summer, and this person had hung himself in a garage by the mechanism that holds the garage door shut. There were no other doors or windows. So he had been in there for some time. The body was decomposing. The smell was noticeable as soon as you got out of the car. I went to the officers gathered on scene, and there were a couple firefighters and a fire chaplain who were there. And they identified that there's a sister of the deceased, mother of the deceased. We're going to call hazmat out to make entry into the garage because it's a mess and difficult. And so they were going to try to do this as professionally as it can be done. But we were going to wait for a little while, and it seemed obvious that my role in this case should be to do some short-term crisis counseling with the family. And they said, "Well, actually, chaplain, we're going to have the fire chaplain talk to the mother and to the sister, but they're not the ones who discovered the body. The ones who discovered the body were a 10-year-old boy and an 8-year-old girl, the niece and nephew of the deceased, who were looking for their favorite uncle and went to his house. And the little boy pulled open the garage door with all his strength, just enough for his little sister to crawl underneath, where she discovered the body. And she thought it looked like a mannequin until she recognized her uncle's tattoo on his arm. They said, these two little kids, a 10-year-old and the 8-year-old, they're in the car right over here. Chaplain, will you go talk to them? I don't know how you prepare for that. Uh, I feel like my officers were traumatized just knowing what had occurred. And now I'm going to go talk to these children and start the long, long process of healing for them. So this scenario where we had the incident at the hospital, the incident with this hanging, and then a couple days later, another death investigation, and a shooting investigation, and a debrief, it just all in about a 48-hour, 72-hour span. This is somewhat what it's like to be a chaplain. And let me explain what a chaplain is. Police chaplaincy, I would say, has two different aspects. Now, I described a lot of different things in that scenario, but one of the breakdowns that you could use, and I sometimes describe it as wearing two different hats, is that I have a short-term hat and a long-term hat. Where there's a short-term kind of on-call responsibility and then an embedded responsibility, a long-term, I'm connected kind of responsibility. And so, what is a police chaplain? A chaplain has a special interest in training and providing pastoral care in the law enforcement setting. Now, chaplains vary a lot. There's a wide variety. Every agency has different requirements. You may have chaplains with advanced degrees in theology and psychology. They are trained clinicians. They are highly experienced. Some chaplains have first responder experience. Their first career was in law enforcement or fire, and now they've come over to work in chaplaincy. But some chaplains don't have any background in the first responder world. Being a chaplain is their first exposure to it, and you have chaplains who aren't, carrying advanced degrees. They've just been faithfully serving people for decades, and they've learned a thing or two because they've seen a thing or two. So you have a wide variety of chaplains and a wide variety of expertise and subspecialties and that kind of thing. But generally speaking, you do have, these kind of two different worlds. Now, not everything we do is spiritual. I was joking with Dr. Dara before this started that, yeah, people are scared to death of chaplains. They think, oh, this chaplain, he's a religious figure. He's going to beat me over the head with a Bible. He's going to judge me and threaten me and preach at me and try to convert me, that kind of a thing. Really, a chaplain could do that. A chaplain could walk into the police station, pull over a chair, stand on the chair, and preach the gospel to everybody in the police station one time. It would work one time, and then they'd be kicked out. They would have lost trust with everybody there. And frankly, even if you're more subtle with it, is there any group on earth that's going to see through the facade and know your ulterior motive, that really the only reason you're a chaplain is to sell them something or recruit them to your church or try to convert them all or whatever? If there's any group that's going to suss out that ulterior motive, it's going to be a group of cops. And so you can't go in with an ulterior motive. You have to be willing to have a secular purpose alongside the spiritual purpose. And so what I wrote here on this slide is that it's not just spiritual. We do death notifications, liaison work, officer wellness and morale responsibilities. We do family support. We do counseling. Chaplains have many, many, many different roles across the entire department. And I think a good chaplain will find a niche, but then will also be helpful. Sometimes one of the best things you can do is just be willing to stack chairs or take out trash to the dumpster. And that kind of service to those who are serving others is a noble calling. And chaplains are good usually at finding that. Chaplains who are not good at that maybe shouldn't be chaplains. But like I said, there are two common types of police chaplaincy work: the being on call element and the being embedded in an agency. So let's compare and contrast those real quick. These two aspects of chaplaincy. The first one is to be on call. It means to respond to calls for service. And I described that before. I have certain days of the month where I'm on call 24/7 and for usually several days in a row. And dispatch will call me, and just like the rest of the first responder world, I'm responding out to an emergency. I'm going to go do a death notification, and I have a few moments to prepare before I walk up to the door of somebody and deliver the worst news they will ever hear in their life. And so that is being on call. That on call, the direction of it is to provide services to those who are suffering. They're experiencing a loss, they're a victim of a crime, they are suffering. They are injured emotionally or physically or both, and we are providing services to them. But then the embedded role is different. The embedded role is where I was describing that I was going to the family and then I'd retreat over to speak to my officers, then I'd go back to the family and I'd go back and forth. The embedded role is that long-term relationship I have with the officers. A family on the scene of a homicide, they're standing at the yellow tape and their loved one is in the middle of an investigation. That family I'll deal with them for 2 or 3 or 4 hours and then probably never see them again. But my officers, my intention is to see them repeatedly. In fact, my big audacious goal as a chaplain, I mean, my ambition as a chaplain is that these officers that I teach at the police academy and that I ride along with as young patrol officers, if I could, and some of them, they're now 5 or 10 years into their career, if I could see them all the way through a 25 or 30-year career and they had me as a chaplain the entirety of their 30-year career, that's my big ambition. If the Lord allows me to do that, then that's what I would ask for. That's what I want to do, is to be embedded with them long term. And so the goal with the embedded aspect of chaplaincy is to build rapport with the first responders. I go to roll calls. I build relationships with them. I don't betray their trust. I establish a reputation with them and build rapport. That's what I'm doing. And then the direction of that is to offer my services to those who are in the path of suffering. Our first responders are not typically the victim. They sometimes are, but usually they're experiencing a secondary trauma. They are witnessing, and sometimes up to their eyeballs, in all of the blood and the gore and the trauma and the heartbreak, the tragedy and the despair. They see all of that, and they pretend to have a hard shell. You go around, I'll walk around the perimeter of a homicide scene and check with all the officers who are guarding the yellow tape. And I'll ask them, how are you doing? You doing okay? And they lie to me and say, yeah, chap, I'm fine. And that's this little game we play. I know they're lying. They know they're lying. They know they're affected by that. No one should have to see some of the stuff that we see out there. But we are checking on one another, and we who are in the path of the suffering. We're not suffering directly, but we're suffering because of other people suffering. We are checking on each other and supporting one another and sharing in this. Some of the best embedding I think I've ever done was being called out to a homicide scene at an apartment building, out in the parking lot of the apartment building. It's 2 o'clock in the morning and it's snowing sideways. And it's snow, sleet, rain all mixed together. It is miserable. But I've got my heavy coat on, and I stood at the yellow tape and got snowed on. And me and this other officer, we just stood there while the snow accumulated on like the upper left side as the wind's blowing in. That was good chaplaincy. Not because I said anything. I didn't solve any problems. I didn't explain some delicate issue of theology about why God lets bad things happen, or why evil people seem to prosper, or anything like that at all. I just stood at the yellow tape and suffered with my officers. And in doing that, that that provided, a connection. We set together. And so I do both sides of this. I wear both hats. I do the short-term work with citizens, and I do the long-term work, the embedded work with my officers. I think I do about 180 roll calls a year. And so I'm getting up early in the morning to hit day shift, middle of the afternoon to hit afternoon shift. We do 8-hour shifts. And then, 11 o'clock at night to get to my midnight guys. And occasionally I'll have somebody, they'll complain, I see you more often than I see our major. Like, well, your major has very important work to do. And frankly, avoiding you is probably good for her mental health. And so, it's okay that the chaplain is here a little bit more often. And so we have a relationship where I'm out doing ride-alongs. I put on a Kevlar vest that says chaplain on it, and I go out and ride with them, and I know who their supervisors are. I know their names. I can recognize them out of uniform if I run into them at Walmart. I have a connection with these officers. And so I'm doing the short-term on-call responsibility, and I'm doing the long-term embedded responsibility. A little bit more about this. When you're on call, your disposition is mostly reactive. It's not all reactive, but it's primarily reactive. The first responder world is a reactive kind of a thing. You are ready to go, which means that everything gets out of whack as far as your brain chemistry and being hyper vigilant and you're just always tense. I'm on call, like I said, sometimes for a week at a time, and it's hard to sleep at night. Thinking at any moment my phone may ring and I may have to jump up and I might be at a homicide scene or a death investigation of some other type, car accident on the interstate or who knows what, you know. And so that's a anxious thing to live with, but it's a reactive thing. Where the embedded role is a proactive. I can look at my calendar a month in advance and decide I'm going to go to these roll calls, or maybe not that far out. Maybe I just know there's somebody I want to check on and I know their work schedule. And so I'm going to make sure I intercept them. I'm not going to necessarily say anything. I'm not going to accost them. But you know what? When they come back to work after an injury or they come back to work after an officer involved shooting, the first person they're going to see is their chaplain. And that doesn't mean we're going to have a conversation. It doesn't mean they're going to cry on my shoulder or anything like that. We just may look across the room at each other and nod, and that's maybe all we're going to do at that stage. But it's a proactive thing that I'm deliberately putting myself in the path of my officers to check on them. I'll send them a text. I'll be proactive. And so that's a little bit different concept as far as my disposition from being on call to being embedded. And some chaplains are primarily one or the other. Traditionally, hospital chaplains, hospice chaplains with those who are dying, jail chaplains, and some other types of, corporate chaplains and other types of chaplains are mostly reactive. They are there kind of a break glass in case of emergency sort of situation. And that's not bad. We need that. We need people who are ready to jump up and step in there and help those who are suffering and be ready in a moment to go from 0 to 100 where everything was fine and now you're in the midst of a tragedy. And then it's fine again, and now you're back in the midst of a tragedy. That is a profound calling to do that work. But traditionally, there are chaplains who are more embedded and more proactive, and that's more their focus. I was primarily trained by and influenced by military chaplains. A military chaplain, in theory, jumps out of the airplane with the paratroopers and lives on the ship with the sailors. And so if you're going to follow that pattern, then a good proactive embedded police chaplain should be in the patrol car. He should know, who works at what station and what equipment they're using and what things are changing from year to year and which supervisors are in charge now and what the character of a shift is like, because each shift has it's like an animal. Each shift has its own personality, and they should know that. And that kind of embeddedness is common in the military and paramilitary style chaplains that you would find in maybe police departments and some fire departments. I think this is important, and I feel like it's being underutilized in our current culture. Chaplains have been around for a long time. First thing George Washington did when he set up the Continental Army is he appointed chaplains. Chaplains are important. And like I said, chaplains do not need to be overbearing, difficult, judgmental. That doesn't have to be the nature of a chaplain at all. And I would argue that most chaplains are not that way, and the ones who are don't last very long. But we need to have chaplains who are connected. And so I'm pushing hard, not only to increase the number of people who are chaplains. We do not have enough clergy in America to supply the number of chaplains that our first responders need. We're going to have to bring a retired first responder into the pastoral world and ordain them and then train them as a chaplain. And frankly, that might be the shorter route to get to having more chaplains who are culturally competent than to, try to find more priests and pastors who are willing to do the work. Because frankly, if you're not called to it, you can't just take any clergy member and make them a chaplain. And so we don't have enough. I am pushing to have more chaplains. And I'm also pushing specifically to train them to be embedded in an agency, to be like, this is my firehouse. I am going to be the chaplain for all three shifts or four shifts, whichever they have, at this firehouse. And I'm going to know everyone who works here. And I'm going to be resource for them. We have EAP, we have great counselors and family doctors and peer support. That's wonderful and good, and chaplains should be supporting that. But hopefully, a chaplain is another tool in the toolbox. And for me and my agency, I'm a volunteer. I'm not a sworn officer. And so I have one foot in their world, but also have one foot outside of their world. So I'm outside of their discipline and their promotion process. I don't affect any of that. I'm under layers of non-disclosure and confidentiality like any counselor would be. And yet I'm in the car with them regularly and I'm in the station with them all the time. And so that kind of connection is useful and it's something I'm trying to promote more of. And so the question is how? How do you do that? That's fine, but the only chaplain we had at our agency was this 80-year-old Catholic priest, and nobody even knew who he was, and he'd just show up and pray at graduations and ceremonies, and then he'd disappear. I don't know what closet they kept him in, but we never saw him. A lot of people have stories like that about their chaplains. And I think that part of it is because specifically with law enforcement, cops are hard to get to know. And so they're suspicious of outsiders. It is difficult for an outsider to just come and attach themselves. That is not a natural thing. Their antibodies reject that. Every cop does. Cops are suspicious. They're looking for ulterior motives. They go through their day where everybody lies to them all the time. And so for someone to come and say, I just want to help. I just want to be helpful. I just want to support you and encourage officer wellness and answer questions if you want to. But if you don't want to, I'll wait 5 or 10 years for you to feel like asking me a question. They just don't believe that's real. And so it's hard for them to embrace that. And so I often talk to chaplains about, how do we get behind the badge? How do we become embedded and rooted in the life of your police department so that you are making a difference and hopefully putting a dent in the suicide rate and the divorce rate and the alcoholism rate, where you are one of the options, one of the tools in the toolbox when they do need to reach out to somebody. How do we get there? And so the first thing with this proactive embedded model is to get permission. If you're a new chaplain or you're trying to restart your chaplain program, you need to get buy-in from leadership. You need to get permission. You cannot just stroll in and insert yourself because the biggest danger to destroying the trust that you might have is to overstep or to interfere. And so if you're interfering with an investigation, if you're in the way, that's going to destroy the trust that you're trying to build up. And you're probably starting from zero because they're cops. They will push you away to see if you can be pushed away. So you have to try to get buy-in from leadership to give you permission to be there. Hopefully you're in an area where there is a law enforcement chaplain association, either locally or regionally or nationally, like with a group like ICPC or some others, the International Conference of Police Chaplains. But there are multiple different groups that can train you and prepare you and maybe give you some credibility and some credentials of some kind. If not credentials, then at least, some kind of training. And you need to be getting permission. Now, I also wrote on there, or you need to earn forgiveness. And the reason I put that in there is because a lot of agencies who have not had an active chaplain program don't know what to do with you. They think, well, I guess we could have someone pray a prayer the next time we have like a big public function. And beyond that, they don't know what to do. They just don't know what to do with you. And so sometimes you can go insert yourself, once you've built up some trust, but you can insert yourself and be like, you know what? There's a community meeting at police headquarters, and it's kind of a challenge to know what door to come in and find that conference room if you don't work there. And so I'm going to be the doorman and I'm just going to humbly, meet people and greet them and bring them in and help them get through security and show them where to go. And the police chief probably doesn't know that he needs that when he brings in a bunch of community leaders. But if you can volunteer to do that, you don't necessarily have to explain this in a memo first. You can just go do it, insert yourself there, prove that you're useful, prove that you can be trusted, prove that you're not going to take advantage of that in any way, shape, or form. And sometimes that's the way to start building that trust. When I began, our chaplain corps had not actively been embedding for several years. And the military guys told me, hey, jump out of the plane with the paratroopers. So I just started showing up at roll calls. I didn't ask anybody to. It was in our general orders. If you like blow the dust off of the general orders that talked about chaplains, that it was in there already. And so I just started showing up. And in doing that, and in never, never, never taking advantage of that, by showing myself to be trustworthy over a long period of time, now my officers would be disappointed if a new chaplain didn't show up. The commanders now have risen up through the ranks, and now they would expect a chaplain to do that now. And so some of that you get permission for as much as you can. Make sure you got there's, SOP and general orders and that kind of stuff that cover you. And then keep showing up both for good things and for bad things. The terrible tragedies like a line of duty death, which we've had two here in Kansas City, Kansas, just this summer. In the last 6 weeks, we've lost two officers, but also the positive things, the family days and the fun night at the FOP and that sort of thing. So having, getting permission and being involved that way is really, really important. Then the second thing is to think small. A lot of chaplains are also ministers, and of course, they want to be. They have aspirations to be important and to have a large congregation and a big church or synagogue or whatever it is, and they want to be important. But the truth is, in chaplaincy, you really need to think small. You need to be thinking of quality over quantity. When I first became a chaplain, I looked in our county, which is a kind of a suburb of the larger Kansas City metropolitan area, and I saw a police department, a fire department, and a sheriff's office, each with maybe 300 to 400 people sworn. And I thought, oh, there's 1,000 to 1,200 people. I'll be a chaplain to all of them, plus all of the civilians. And so I'll be a chaplain to all of those people. In reality, that's too large of a group for any one chaplain to know who that's just a crowd. That's just a sea of faces. You need to be thinking in terms of smaller numbers. And so I thought, well, I'll just focus on the police department. Well, that's still 350 sworn. That was still too many. And so then I thought, you know what? It turns out that if you look through history and through sociology, that humans naturally group themselves into groups of about 120 to like 150. That's the number that keeps popping up again and again. And so a tribe of people out in ancient times, or even a church, a lot of churches plateau right at about 120, 150, maybe upwards of 200. But once you get past that, that's too many people to keep track of in your head. Your spreadsheet can cover them all, but you can't. And so having about 120 to 150 people, well, turns out the patrol divisions had about 130 sworn officers in the patrol divisions. And so I just decided, okay, I'm going to be the patrol chaplain. I will be happy to help the detectives. I'd be happy to help CSI or the chief's office or any other group dispatch, but I'm just going to spend time and be deliberately proactive with the patrol divisions, the three patrol divisions. And so with that 120, 130 officers, that's how I know everybody's name. If I included the rest of the department, it'd be too much and I'd lose track. The solution to that is to have more chaplains. And now we do have more chaplains. In fact, we just started a chaplain this year who is going to be, he's a retired homicide detective, and he's going to be the chaplain for our investigative bureau. So for all of our detectives and narcotics and all those people. And so focusing small brings a quality of its own. And so I know that sounds counterintuitive, but think small so you can have better, deeper relationships. Third thing is to be a humble learner. I know some of you are thinking, well, I'm a chaplain or I want to be a chaplain, and I served 30 years. I wrote the manual that they teach at the academy. I don't have anything more to learn about about police work. That's true in a general sense, and I respect you for your service. But you are not currently working each of these jobs on these ships with these supervisors and probably not with this equipment. In fact, if you've been off the street more than 4 or 5 years, I know from riding along with my officers that there's just this abundance of change that happens. And in the 10 years or so that I've been a chaplain, all kinds of stuff have changed. Policies have changed, and equipment has changed, and procedures have changed. And so be humble and ask questions. Everybody's favorite topic is themselves. And so ask them about them and ask them, well, how do you do this? And what are you logging into on the computer to search for whatever it is you're searching for? Be a humble learner. Number four, relate deeply. I learned this from an evangelism class. When you're getting to know people, there's kind of three levels at which you can know people. If you know them at the surface level, you're just putting together names and faces. And some people call that knowing people. It's not. That is just the entry. That is the front door. That's just the very beginning if you're putting together names and faces. If you are getting to know them well, you will then get to know things about them. You can see them and you can know facts about their life, about who they are, what they do. All of this detail about their life is something that you can know. That knowledge is the second level. But then there's a third level that I want to challenge you to try to get to. And that requires meaningful conversation because this third level, that's the level of like their dreams and aspirations. What do they want to be? Why are they in law enforcement? Do they want to be do they want to get promoted to sergeant? Do they want to be a homicide detective? Do they want to do K-9 and SWAT, which a lot of those are pretty typical answers. But if you ask, if you just assume that's what they all want, wait until you ride with somebody for a few hours and you start to have these conversations and you ask them and find out, oh, no, 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 no. The whole reason they got into this was to do CSI or to be in community policing. Or this will always throw you for a loop. They want to be a patrol officer for 25 years. There are people who want that. And you think, no, they all want to promote and get out and do something else. Not the case. But you won't know that till you get to that third level. So do everything you can to relate deeply. And then the last thing is to be patient. It takes a long time to get behind the badge. I can talk now after being with this agency for almost 10 years and being a pastor to police officers for 30 years. It's easy now for me as an outsider to relate to cops. But every time I go in, and I have coming up in the next few weeks, I've got to go in and teach a new class of 22 young recruits at the police academy. And I'm going to introduce myself, and I am desperately going to try to learn their names and faces, and then move on to the second level and then the third level, right? I'm going to try to do all that. But I know that none of them trust me. Just because I'm introduced to them as one of the chaplains, that doesn't mean anything. It's going to take me a year, 18 months, maybe 2 years to begin to trust them. And occasionally I'll have a young officer who grew up in church and I remind them of a pastor or a youth pastor and they're like, oh, yes, 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 I'm all for it. But they're not always the ones who need me. And some of the cops who are closest to me now are the ones who were the grizzled, old, grumpy, don't go to church, don't like organized religion, have, nothing good to say about anyone or anything. I just stuck with it and I would not be pushed away. I would not be run out of the room. I certainly did not go in. And the first time they started cursing and dropping four-letter words, I clutched my pearls and I'm all offended. I didn't do any of that. I would not be pushed away. And in doing that, some of those fellows are the ones who are closest to me now after several years. And now I'm at a stage, having been there, and I've gotten behind the badge, at least with the ones who've been there for a while, not with the new ones. But now I'm being asked to do, okay, can we come meet with you before we go to, marital counseling? Or can you officiate my grandmother's funeral? Those kinds of requests are starting to come my way at a more regular pace than anything I would have seen when I first started this a decade ago. So let me encourage you. get out there and be involved and know and love these police officers deeply. If you have any thoughts about being a chaplain, doesn't matter if you're Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Buddhist or something else entirely, we have room for all kinds of different chaplains. But if you're willing to go in and truly serve without an ulterior motive, without trying to build up your own religious group and pull from the ranks or sell them something. If you really can do this without an ulterior motive, a chaplain can be this powerful and effective tool in the life of a police agency that really does make a difference. It's hard to measure. We'll never know how many suicides we prevent or divorces we prevent, but I'm convinced that chaplains are powerful and effective in that way. And so let me just end with a note about the podcast because if you're at the end of the second day of this conference, that means you like stuff that's free. All right. And I believe in free podcasts and I do have podcasts that have commercials that I listen to, but I don't care for it. And so the Hey Chaplain podcast is the podcast I've been doing for several years now, and there's no commercials. I'm not selling you anything. Nothing is behind a paywall. All of it is 100% free because I know that not every young 22 or 23-year-old police officer just fresh out of the FTO program is going to go talk to a chaplain, but he might listen to a chaplain talk to other cops about things that they've learned about wisdom and how to get through your career and how to be healthy and keep a marriage together. That information doesn't filter down very well. And so I interview cops from LAPD to Scotland Yard, all around the country and all around the world, and sometimes also psychologists like Dr. Dara, and he's been on the show. But I talk to people to bring wisdom to young cops. And so this is a free resource. It's on every platform. It does, I don't get anything from it at all. There are people who support me like behind the scenes, but it's just to pay my hosting fees. I don't get paid to produce that show. That show exists so that there's one more free resource for a cop to listen to. And I hope it's one of the few positive and encouraging things he hears. And when he hears a cop that's been through something difficult and survived and came out the other side and was able to still be healthy and happy, that's the kind of story that I'm trying to bring each week in the Hey Chaplain podcast. And so I hope that you'll go if you don't know the show already, I hope you go find it and I hope you put it in front of first responders. I have a strange number of firefighters that listen to my show. It's not a firefighter show, it's a police show. But nevertheless, a lot of firefighters listen, a lot of chaplains, of course, listen because of the name, and a lot of cops, all 50 states and 130 countries, I think now, listen to Hey Chaplain every week. And I hope you'll give it a listen also.
Jared, fantastic presentation. Thank you so much for the work that you're doing. You have a lot of comments in the comment chat room, but we
I,
have one question that I want to see if
okay,
we could answer live with you, which
sure.
is you support all of these officers in ways, in so many ways. How do you personally manage your own mental health?
Everybody wants to know that. I am blessed. I came from a very stable home. My ACEs score is zero, and so I have a lot of stability built into my life. But then I discovered very quickly that it doesn't affect you until it affects you. And I had an episode where I had intrusive thoughts, and it was I kind of had a breakdown. And so I've learned that what I need to do when I get called out, it's almost always for a dead body. I hear everybody's worst days. I need to talk to people. If I tell my cops they need to talk to people, then I need to do the same thing. And so I've got cops. I've got a buddy who's in San Diego now, another one in Detroit, one in St. Louis, a couple here in Kansas City that are outside of my agency that I can talk to and be like, hey, I need to debrief. Let me call you. And they walk me through it, and I do the same thing for them. And that is healthier than all the other coping mechanisms. I joke that you can always tell how well I'm handling my stress by what set of clothes I'm in. I'll my eating is what I want to do when I'm stressed, and I'm doing much better than I have through most of my adult life, but it's still a challenge, and you've got to find successful ways to deal with the stress.
Right on, man. That same person that asked that question, Kerwin, he's based in the Caribbean in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. He asked if he could contact you if he ever felt like he needed to reach out to you. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Uh,
You can message me and mention BluePaz with that so that I know because I get a lot of junk mail. I get a
yeah,
lot of people who just want to be like on my show and that kind of
yeah.
thing. And so every agent, every cop that writes a book has an agent that emails me, and I ignore most of those. But ICPC, the International Conference of Police Chaplains, have a very strong presence in the Caribbean. In
Mhm.
fact, I think the current vice president is from Jamaica. But there's good resources for police chaplains in the Caribbean, in the United States, and we're trying to see that expand across the world.